Well, again, welcome everybody to the Essentials of Stop the Bleed training course. We're really excited to bring this online training to you and help you learn the essential skills of how to stop the bleed. This course has been developed in cooperation with the U.S. Department of Defense Stop the Bleed campaign, and we firmly believe that working together, we can all save more lives. So let's get right into it. We're going to cover the following topics. First, we'll start by explaining what Stop the Bleed is. We'll then spend a few moments talking about why this is so important. From there, we're really going to focus on how to recognize life-threatening bleeding and what steps you can take to help stop life-threatening bleeding. We'll wrap the course up by talking about things that you can do to get Stop the Bleed ready in your community. Now, it's important before we proceed to just acknowledge a few things. By virtue of the title of this course, we're going to be talking about bleeding, and this material may be disturbing for some audiences. If at any point in time you begin to feel unwell, please feel free to pause the video. The course is intended to give you the fundamentals of what you need to know to control life-threatening bleeding. And please remember, this is not a first aid course. This course will focus exclusively on life-threatening bleeding. If you want to learn more ways to help people during routine emergencies and urgent situations, it's advised that you take a full first aid course. So let's talk about Stop the Bleed. Well, Stop the Bleed is a national and now international effort to encourage people to be trained, equipped, and empowered to help one another during times of a bleeding emergency. This information and the knowledge that we have gained about how to control life-threatening hemorrhage really stems from military experiences that started off on the battlefield and showed us that non-medical personnel with minimal training can learn how to recognize and control life-threatening bleeding, and that these actions can have a profound effect on improving survival. Stop the Bleed itself is a public-private partnership that's led by the U.S. Department of Defense on the government side. I think it's important that we take just a few moments to really explain why it is so essential for everyone to learn how to recognize and treat life-threatening bleeding. Bleeding is the number one cause of preventable death from injuries. By recognizing what life-threatening bleeding looks like, your immediate actions can help save lives. Traumatic injuries are, in fact, the leading cause of death for people under the age of 46, and in all age groups, they are a major cause of death. Now, here's the challenge. People can die very quickly from uncontrolled life-threatening bleeding, even before an ambulance arrives. Motor vehicle crashes and falls are the leading cause of traumatic injuries. The bottom line is that controlling bleeding can save a life. So now that we've explained a little bit more about the impact that life-threatening bleeding can have on injuries, let's talk a little bit more about time, because when we think about life-threatening situations, time is our biggest enemy. People can bleed to death from a severe wound in as little as 3 to 5 minutes. In most places throughout the United States, and in those places around the world with established emergency medical services systems, it can take anywhere between 7 to 10 minutes for responders to arrive to a patient's side. And when we think about the impact that bleeding has on trauma deaths, we note that nearly 40% of all trauma deaths worldwide are due to some type of bleeding. You may be the difference between life and death. When we think about life-threatening bleeding, certain things tend to come into people's minds. Life-threatening bleeding can happen at any time for any number of reasons. Listed here are some of the more common reasons that life-threatening bleeding may occur. We think about mishaps or injuries that may occur in the home or the workplace, motor vehicle collisions, industrial accidents, acts of violence or intentional harm, natural disasters, and recreation accidents. These are some of the many situations that can result in life-threatening bleeding. I'd encourage you to take a few moments after this course to think about some situations in the course of your routine activities that may result in life-threatening bleeding. The science and the evidence behind Stop the Bleed stem from military lessons learned initially on the battlefields in Iraq and Afghanistan, where battlefield deaths from blood loss were reduced dramatically when soldiers were taught how to stop the bleed and were equipped with Stop the Bleed related equipment, including tourniquets and hemostatic dressings. Hemostatic dressings have special properties to help blood clot faster. This information has since been translated to the civilian environment, and the civilian lessons learned have continued to show us that deaths following traumatic injury are reduced dramatically when stop-the-bleed interventions and techniques are performed prior to the onset of shock. By saving one life, we can impact many lives around that person. Before we proceed any further, it's important to take a moment to acknowledge that when rendering care to someone who's suffering from life-threatening bleeding, there are certain steps that you should consider taking. First and foremost, your safety has to remain paramount. We at no time are advocating for you to put yourself in harm's way. Scenes and situations during which an injury that causes life-threatening bleeding may have happened can be dangerous and may quickly become unsafe. We don't want you to be the next patient. So, we want you to maintain awareness and look around you for signs of ongoing or evolving danger. Some examples may include smoke, broken glass, downed wires, traffic, falling debris, and other hazards such as slippery surfaces or poor light. You should know where you can quickly go to relocate. In other words, have an exit plan. What would you do if all of a sudden that scene became unsafe? If you're on the side of a roadway, perhaps it's getting on the other side of the guardrail. If possible, you should try to wear gloves and a mask if available to help protect yourself. If those resources are not available, consider putting something between your hands and the bleeding wound. Also remember, it's very important that you follow the instructions of emergency responders as they arrive on scene. Calling for help and activating the emergency response system is essential to assisting someone who's suffering from life-threatening bleeding. It's important that you know what to do and what to say to get help to the person as quickly as possible. First and foremost, immediately apply pressure to a wound with life-threatening bleeding. Do not delay this. Tell someone else to call 911 right away so you can maintain pressure. Clearly describe where the bleeding person is located in a building, such as we are on the second floor in the third room on the right. If no one else can call and you're by yourself, consider using the speakerphone function on your telephone, if of course safe to do so. This will allow you to simultaneously help the injured person while also activating the emergency response system. Lastly, make sure that you do not hang up until the 911 operator tells you to do so. Recognizing life-threatening bleeding is the first step in controlling it. Signs that bleeding may be life-threatening include blood that is briskly and continuously coming out of a wound, bleeding from the loss of an extremity, at least half the volume of a soda can's worth of blood pooling on the ground, or bleeding in someone who is confused or unconscious, as this may indicate shock. Let's take a moment now to watch a short video.
There are two main ways to tell whether bleeding is serious enough to require a tourniquet: the volume of blood and the flow. Volume refers to the amount of blood present. Think about a soda can. Cut that amount in half. If that amount of blood is present, then it's serious life-threatening bleeding. Another warning sign is flow. If the blood is squirting, pooling on the surface, or if it's flowing continuously, then it's serious life-threatening bleeding.
To recap, when determining if this bleeding is life-threatening, look at the volume of blood that is pooled around the person on the ground. If there's at least half of a volume of a soda can's worth of blood on the ground, that bleeding should be considered life-threatening. If the blood is brisk and continuous, that is a sign of life-threatening bleeding. If there's significant loss of an extremity, such as an arm or a leg, that too may indicate life-threatening bleeding. And again, if someone is unconscious or confused. Now let's apply this knowledge to another short video to help you determine whether or not bleeding is life-threatening.
This person's arm is injured, but it looks like neither the volume nor the flow of blood indicates we need a tourniquet. We need direct pressure instead. You, call 911. This person's injuries are more severe. There's more blood than half a soda can, and it's flowing really fast.
Now that we've spent some time talking about signs of life-threatening bleeding, let's focus on the steps you can take to control it. The Stop the Bleed campaign symbol is a stop sign with the hand in it, and that is to remind you that pressure is what stops bleeding. You can apply pressure to anywhere on the body, and as long as the pressure that you apply is greater than the pressure of the blood coming out of the wound, the bleeding can be controlled. So let's talk about the steps to apply direct pressure. Think gloves, gauze, and pressure. Wear gloves if possible, and if gloves are not available, use any kind of a barrier, such as a plastic bag or even a cloth. Gauze should be placed directly into the wound, and if gauze is not available, you can use preferably something clean, of course, to place into the wound. Now apply firm, continuous, and steady pressure. This can be done anywhere in the body. It's important also to maintain that pressure until help arrives. We recommend using the CPR position with both elbows locked, using your upper body's weight, holding pressure on that bleeding wound. Let's watch a short video highlighting how to apply pressure.
Apply continuous pressure directly onto the wound with your elbows in a locked position.
In the event that a bleeding control kit or gauze is not immediately available, a clean shirt or cloth may be placed directly into the wound, and apply and maintain direct pressure with elbows locked. Gauze, preferentially hemostatic gauze that will help blood to clot faster, can be placed directly into the wound with life-threatening bleeding.
Use one hand to hold the gauze and the other hand to feed the gauze into the bleeding wound. If possible, direct the gauze to the part of the wound where blood is coming from the most. Pack or fill the wound entirely with the gauze and place any remaining gauze on top of the wound. Then apply and maintain direct pressure with your elbows in a locked position.
Where the bleeding occurs on the body is essential in terms of what steps and techniques we can use to control it. Tourniquets are our first choice for life-threatening bleeding on the arms or legs, as outlined by the green sections on this illustration. If a commercial tourniquet is not available, hold direct pressure until responders arrive. We often get lots of questions about improvised tourniquets, and these are taught in more advanced classes, and that's because if not done properly, they can be ineffective and harmful. When applying a tourniquet, place it at least 2 inches from the wound, between the location of the wound and the torso. Do not apply the tourniquet on top of a wound, over a joint, or over a pocket. When using a tourniquet, remember, pull, twist, and clip. Pull that strap tightly as possible and take all the slack out. This is actually one of the most important steps, and it alone can help slow down life-threatening bleeding. Next, twist or spin the windlass rod until the bleeding stops. And lastly, clip or secure that strap in place. Let's take a moment to watch a video about tourniquet application.
Place the tourniquet onto the bleeding extremity with the free end of the strap towards yourself. Slide the tourniquet at least 2 to 3 inches above the level of the bleeding wound, between the bleeding wound and the person's torso. Do not place the tourniquet over a joint or on the wound itself. Ensure the tourniquet strap lays flat against the skin. Pull the free end of the strap as tight as possible. Then spin the windlass rod until the bleeding stops. Secure the windlass rod to the clasp and safety clip. Note the time that the tourniquet was applied on the tourniquet's label.
If after the tourniquet is applied and life-threatening bleeding continues, consider applying a second tourniquet closer to the torso. And if that doesn't work, continue to hold and maintain direct pressure. Tourniquets cause pain, and this is normal, so explain that to the person. Tourniquets should only be removed by trained personnel. Here are some examples of commonly recommended tourniquets. The Soft T tourniquet has a metal windlass or rod, metal clips, and metal bracket. The SAM XT tourniquet has a plastic clip and clicking mechanism to help maintain pressure. And the CAT tourniquet can be identified by its Velcro straps. It is very important that you avoid purchasing knockoff or inexpensive tourniquets. Counterfeit tourniquets can be found online, and these tourniquets have been shown to cause harm in real-world situations. We therefore recommend that you only purchase approved equipment from trusted medical sources, and all products bearing the Stop the Bleed logo meet DoD's quality standards. In summary, Stop the Bleed empowers people to take action to minimize death from severe bleeding. During this brief course, we've taught you how to assess for the volume and flow of blood to determine if life-threatening bleeding is present. Remember that pressure stops bleeding, and pressure should be held continuously until help arrives. Tourniquets are your first choice for life-threatening bleeding on arms or legs. Ensuring access to high-quality Stop the Bleed equipment is an important priority for the Stop the Bleed campaign. When you see the Stop the Bleed logo, it indicates quality. The Department of Defense licenses organizations to sell Stop the Bleed equipment and kits, and this equipment is military-grade medical equipment that's been shown to be reliable and effective. Here you can see what we call an individual Stop the Bleed kit. It contains a tourniquet, some hemostatic gauze, a pair of protective gloves, a compression bandage that can be used to help wrap around the hemostatic gauze and maintain pressure, as well as a marker that you can use to note the time that critical interventions, such as tourniquet application, were performed. Many Stop the Bleed kits contain hemostatic gauze. These products are specially designed to help blood clot faster and stay clotted. It is important to apply direct pressure after the gauze is placed into the wound in order for the hemostatic gauze to work. Said another way, the gauze will not work very well at all if pressure is not maintained. Some Stop the Bleed kits may contain additional equipment to help save lives from other types of injuries. Chest seals are one such example and are designed to be placed over wounds on the chest or torso. These seals allow air to escape from a wound but not to re-enter the wound. We recommend additional training on when a chest seal should be used and how to apply it. If you encounter someone who has a chest seal applied and their breathing is worsening, we strongly recommend removing the device. Stop the Bleed equipment can be found in many different locations, from job sites to schools to public places, and may often be co-located with an automated external defibrillator. Look for the Stop the Bleed logo as a way to help you identify and recognize a bleeding control kit is nearby. We'd like to take just a quick moment to talk about the Stop the Bleed Coalition and invite you all to join it. The Coalition is an IRS-approved, tax-exempt, charitable organization that was formed with the mandate to support Stop the Bleed. The Coalition is the only nonprofit with that singular purpose. We invite you to visit the Stop the Bleed Coalition website as your one-stop for all your Stop the Bleed needs, from training resources and campaign information. The Coalition's website is your trusted source for information. Stop the Bleed Day is a day each year that we bring focus to Stop the Bleed and engage people from around the world to take action. Stop the Bleed continues to grow substantially to achieve its goal of training over 200 million people in how to recognize and treat life-threatening bleeding. In closing, we thank you so much for joining the millions of people who have raised their hand and are ready to help during a bleeding emergency.